Everybody, welcome to the 24th of June, 2025. Has Santa Clarita hit critical mass? Are we finished as far as adding inventory to the market? Maybe. We're kind of approaching, getting kind of closer to getting to the middle of summer. Right now, we have 775 active listings on the market. Just to track this over the past 20, 25 days or so, it's been right around there. We've been kind of 780 at some points, 750, 760 at some points. It seems like the market is kind of holding steady, probably with all the things that are happening in the world. Now, people are still looking at real estate. Lots of open houses are being visited. As far as setting up showings, though, prior to open houses happening, that slowed down quite a bit in the buyer world. However, one of the things that I would suggest is if you do have your agent, sit down and have a discussion with them as far as best strategies in this current market. We are watching as real estate buyers are actually becoming more and more educated in the world, which is a good thing. They actually are looking at real estate that is sold, tracking those prices, and then looking at the prices of properties being offered. Now, one of the things that I will point out, the syndication sites don't cover those special options and those special amenities that certain properties have. For example, they're not going to give a lot more credit to a single family residence that's single story than they will a two-story residence. But believe it or not, out here in Santa Clarita Valley, the single story are more rare than the two-story. 1 in 4, 1 in 5, depending, are single story out here. So that does create an additional incentive for those sellers by the way of they're able to capture more square foot per dollar, or dollars per square foot when they are selling those properties. In addition, views add a lot as well, depending on the type of view. You can have a city view, or you can have kind of an open view, or an area view, or a valley view. Those are fantastic as well. Cul-de-sac homes, a lot of people like those. I think a majority do because of the safety that's kind of inferred by living in a cul-de-sac. You have those neighbors, plus as far as kids and stuff go, a lot of people that have them also like the kids to be able to play in the cul-de-sac. They get a certain feeling of safety. And then finally, looking at the way that the home is laid out. If it has things like RV parking, that's fantastic. If it has RV possible, that's good too. A gated RV slab is wonderful. And then when you have the large driveway that has ability to park more than just 1 or 2 vehicles, that's also a plus. So these things definitely add to the attractiveness of properties. And when you're pricing those online from an agent perspective, and you look at the syndication websites, a lot of them completely miss that mark. They're looking at recorded values. They're not looking at these small additions to properties that over time and in good numbers actually mean that the seller is going to be able to profit even more. Buyers right now are looking at real estate that's placed on the market. They're looking at those days on market timeframes, but that's not affecting their moving forward. When a buyer finds something that they really like, something they're interested in, they don't hold back in making an offer, even if the offer isn't at the level that the particular seller wants. The things that buyers should do now is start looking at those properties and talk to your agent, of course, if you have one. But my suggestion to my buyers is let's do research. It doesn't take much anymore with the advent of the artificial intelligence realm. We do have those large language models. They crunch numbers like nobody's business. So using those to be more of your friend and not your enemy, I think helps, because they're able to develop strategies when you're looking at historical sold prices in neighborhoods. And then they're able to compare that with the active listings or the active listing that the buyer might like. You can do those comparisons very easily. And then it's going to basically provide for you a lot of information concerning an offering strategy on the property, and then verify with your agent that that's proper for this particular market. But then when you send off that offer, you have that additional validation of paperwork, documentation, and that raw real estate data that comes from the multiple listing service. So you're not just guessing. It does give information depending on how you prompt it, the question that you ask it to work on, whether you're going to use deep research. And a lot of times you don't even need that. You can just use the general garden variety, run of the mill large language model output. But when you do this and you're asking it, you also want to differentiate, maybe gauge it against the places where a lot of buyers happen to be looking. Now, while the syndication websites don't often provide great values, sometimes that, in addition to what you're providing from the MLS, will also give you something to offer to the seller, because sometimes sellers are very dependent on those online systems. And it's not really their fault the way that those systems advertise and market. They also use AI to be able to get people to influence them to do something that they might actually not be prepared for, and that includes maybe selecting a different pricing strategy than they should, dependent on that local market. Watch out for yourselves. Be good to each other. Make sure you check out Santa Clarita openhouses.com to see that. Just real quick, let me go ahead and run over the 7 days of activity that we see here. Right now, we have a total of 21 listings that are coming soon. 16 of those have been added in the last 7 days. 92 new listings have entered the market here in all of Santa Clarita Valley. These are all types of residential real estate, single-family residences, both attached, detached condominiums, townhomes. We have 106 properties that have had their prices changed, some increases, some decreases. The question I often get, and it happened this last weekend at the latest open house that we were holding, somebody asked whether the prices are declining out here because they're seeing all of these price changes. It is not declining. Properties are being priced in a certain way. Reductions in listing price in this particular market, not always, but right now, as we're here in June, closing out June of 2025, a strategy is to modify that listing price. And then once you do that, the syndication sites pick it up again and populate it. And that's another chance for potentially a buyer that might not be represented by an agent to be able to see it and then maybe spark their interest. So it does basically, like the cream rises to the top. Any kind of change in pricing is not a bad strategy, and it doesn't have to be much at all. $1 will do it. I don't see that happen much. But again, that pricing strategy just changed when those listings actually rise back to the top, so they're seen again. So having incremental times and strategies with price reductions or changes, depending on the way the property is being shown, how often it's being seen, and also the feedback from those buyers and those buyers' agents is really important in getting that property looked at by more eyeballs. And the more people you have seeing a property, of course, the more chances are that it's going to come out and get sold by the best case scenario for those real estate sellers. So we have back on market properties 13. These are properties that have not completed the escrow process. They were in. A lot of questions come up on these. What are these reasons? Did the buyer discover something ominous with regard to the house? Not usually. Usually, sometimes buyers lose their financing. I know, case in point, very recently, we had a buyer go out and finance a truck, and not just any truck, a $130,000 Ford Raptor truck. And, they're wonderful and great, but they should have been educated on their lender's side, and they should have told them, listen, while we're in this process of you buying a house, while you're in escrow, do not go out and buy something. And they were represented by another agent on the other side of the transaction. They should have had that discussion with them. Maybe they did. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they just couldn't pass up the truck. But that did thwart their ability to purchase real estate, at least for quite a while, probably several months. I don't know if they're ever going to have that capability again, because a $130,000 car is definitely has its own impact, especially when you're pretty much tapped out on a mortgage. Being approved in that way, you go expend that kind of money while you're in escrow, it's going to create problems. And of course it did. The buyer wasn't able to perform, so the house bombs or goes back on market, BOM. So we have 13 of those. And sometimes it is an issue between maybe something the buyer discovered on the property. Maybe they went back and forth with the seller requesting some kind of repairs. Maybe they had buyer regret. Maybe they found something else that they liked better, which sometimes happens. Ethically, that could create issues, maybe legally, depending on where they are in the process. But they're buying the house. Ultimately, it's their decision, and the seller should be made aware that nothing's really finished until it actually finishes and they get those funds deposited in their account. A lot of agents really bet their money on things actually occurring. And I learned a long time ago, being in this since 1998, you never bet on it until that money's actually turned into real funds in an account somewhere. Up until that point, things happen. And it's sad but true. If people aren't educated on this, what to expect, they have a lot of hopes, and sometimes those hopes fall by the wayside and issues come up. Make sure, if you're a real estate agent watching me today, thank you so much for that. Please tell your clients. A lot can happen. When is the best time as you get into escrow to start giving notices and tell people your plans? Probably after the buyer removes all of their contingencies. And at that point, if everything's correct and it's all done the way it's supposed to be, and the buyer removes all their contingencies, after that point, if they cancel escrow for any reason, that deposit then becomes the seller's property. And those deposits aren't cheap. It used to be, just track back a few years, $4,000 and $5,000 was a deposit on a property in a much hotter market. Now we're seeing 3% deposits. So that's $20,000, $30,000 as you approach $1,000,000. That is quite a chunk of change. And for a buyer to cancel after they removed all their contingencies, that deposit could very easily become property of the seller. That's the point. So you want to make sure, if in fact you are going to cancel something, you know your rights, you know your timeframes. Sellers, on your side of it, you want to make sure your agent is enforcing those timeframes. So when it does come time, they are actually pushing that other agent to have those buyers perform and to start signing off on those contingencies, which were established by contract. Those dates are known at the very beginning. They are no secret. If an agent doesn't inform their clients of that, well, that's a problem as from a buyer's agent perspective, and also a problem for the selling agent, because the selling agent is wondering, well, why aren't we not getting the removal of contingencies on this particular date when it's supposed to happen? And of course, the buyer's agent isn't going to do that on their own. It's a seller's agent's job. I've never, in fact, even had a buyer's agent just say, okay, we're going to remove contingencies on this date. It's up to the seller's agent to push. And where does that rubber meet the road? Well, it comes in the form of a notice to perform action. That's another document sent out. If the buyer's not returning it or signing off on the removal of contingencies, there's a couple ways your agent can go with that if it's representing you as the seller. But we don't want to pounce on somebody. We want to approach it depending on who the agent is, depending on the excuses given, depending on what the buyer says. If everybody goes dark, yeah, that's a great time. We should pounce because nobody's communicating. What does that mean? The seller can't waste a lot of time by keeping that property on the market and just waiting for the buyer to perform. There's going to have to be something issued that's basically going to have the buyer do it or not do it. Basically, I was going to say something else, or get off the pot kind of a thing. And in this particular case, that's taking up time for the seller. And depending on the market, it could be that the seller's going to maybe lose money if, in fact, they don't get that property back on the market. So the notice to perform would be that proper action if everything aligns in the right way. So there is a way to do it, but just out there, that's usually the time we tell sellers, after all contingencies are removed, all the inspection contingencies, the review of document contingencies, and of course the loan and appraisal contingencies. Once those are all waived in writing formally, because your agent did that, that's usually not a bad time to start giving notices, because pretty much it's going to be for sure deal. And if it doesn't, then that deposit, if that all has aligned properly, then that deposit becomes the property of the seller. The reason why I say if all that aligns properly, because the buyer could say, no, I'm not going to give the seller my deposit. And then what happens? Well, then everybody gets sued, attorneys get involved, and that sort of thing. Have I ever seen that happen? No. Since I've been in this in 1998, whenever deposit became property of the seller by paperwork in a legal way, after the buyers removed all contingencies and the buyers have canceled, which in of itself is incredibly rare, maybe happened twice, maybe 3 times over those past 20 some odd 5-6 years that I've been in real estate. There wasn't a fight. It was just given up, no lawsuits or anything, because everybody knew it was really laid out very clear to the real estate buyer by signing this. If you cancel after this point, then that deposit will become property of the seller. I'm Connor with Honor. Thank you for listening to my rant. I didn't expect it to go down that path, but I think people need to have things explained to them more. We're all adults in the room buying real estate. We're all 18 and over, and you might not think of the other party as an adult, depending on what side you're on, but we're all adults. So we need to approach this from a very logical point of view, not emotional. So if you have that that little inkling to get emotional about it. It is a business transaction. I know it's the house you've lived in a long time. I know buyers, you're nervous. You don't know if you're spending too much or how the world's going to work or how the market's going to either thrive or collapse. You don't know any of these questions, but it's an adult thing, and it should not be emotionally based. It should be logic based. I'm Connor with Honor. Join me for more logic at Santa Clarita openhouses.com. Be well, it's unlocked there. You can see everything that's for sale, and let me know if I can help you further. And where did I put this button?